Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome, and thank you for joining us. It's amazing to have so many people here today, and we are absolutely delighted to welcome you to this amazing venue. It's my pleasure to welcome you to the BSI Standards Conference, and it's great to see you all here and to encourage you to engage in discussions about standards and BSI's role as the UK's national standards body. Before we proceed with anything else, some guidance for you about this amazing venue and its facilities and what to do in the event of an emergency. This is quite a long bit, so steady yourselves, okay? Toilets, including accessible toilets, are located on this level, just off the corridor between this room and the library, where you will find the catering and the Knowledge Marketplace exhibition. Breakout rooms are located on the upper first floor, accessible via a short set of stairs just past the toilets or the lift, and on the second floor, accessible via the stairs or lift. There are signs available to indicate which side of the building each room is located. For any of you who may require lift access to the breakout rooms, please make yourself known to Imogen Bazzi. Imogen, please give us a wave. I've lost you over here. Thank you. So that we can see you and who will show you the route to the relevant room. It's a little bit complicated, so please ask for help, but obviously maybe don't ask me for help because I haven't done the breakout rooms yet. So the team here are here to help you. The nearest fire exit is inside the room to the left of the stage and down the stairs. Somebody can point that out. Thank you very much, David. The meeting point is Christchurch Gardens. This is located beside St James's Park Tube. When exiting the building, guests should make their way to Tothill Street, which is to the right, and continue down that street for 2 minutes until they see the tube station. I told you this was quite long. And then you turn left and make your way into the gardens. Excuse me. Guests unable to leave via the stairs are to make their way to the lifts just in the main foyer and press a call button where a member of venue staff will then come and collect you for the emergency exit. In amongst all of that, if you have any problems finding anything at all, please just ask one of my colleagues who will raise their hands now wildly. They're mainly over there, and they will be able to help you. Now back to our scheduled programme. I hope that you are looking forward to the day ahead. We have a fantastic programme and speakers. Please, as I've already said, make the most of the opportunity by asking questions and engaging in discussion during the sessions, and also with our exhibitors in the Knowledge Marketplace. My colleagues and I are always happy to speak to you, so please do not hesitate to approach any one of us if you have any questions or if there's anything we can do to help you. Today's conference is focused on emerging technology and digitisation, something once primarily the domain of IT departments and tech companies, but now which impacts all of our lives every day in many, many ways. And we have only really seen the beginnings of how new technologies will transform our lives. Our focus today is on the role of standards in both enabling emerging technologies to succeed and to be scaled up, and the role of standards, in ensuring the technologies are safe, secure, accessible, and sustainable. Later on this afternoon, we will broaden the discussion to explore the wider quality infrastructure, including regulation, accreditation, metrology, and how these work together in enabling a prosperous, safe, and sustainable digital future for all. To start the conversation, let's look at some of the results of our pre-event poll. We asked you what excites you most about the digital future, and here is some of what you had to say. Capabilities to discover new cures and therapies, the ability to monitor, map, and model our built and natural worlds to inform better management, the possibilities it can produce to enhance industries around the world, better decision-making through data-led evidence, the opportunity to solve some of the world's greatest challenges, less strain and pressure on people in regards to labour, and new value creation mechanisms. We hope that you'll be able to explore some of those views with fellow delegates and speakers here today. And so, without further ado, I would like to introduce our keynote speaker. It's an absolute pleasure to have Greg Williams with us today. Greg joined Wired, a popular online and print publishing company specialising in technology, culture, and world news in 2010 as their executive editor. He then rose through the ranks to become the esteemed editor-in-chief. Greg is an authority on technology trends and the many ways that they impact business and society. Through his role at Wired magazine, he meets the innovators, thinkers, scientists, entrepreneurs, and creatives who are changing the world. He writes on a variety of subjects, including innovation, technology, business, creativity, and ideas. Wired World, the annual trends report he edits, is an essential briefing for senior leaders who want to understand the forces shaping the global business landscape. Greg has played a pinnacle role in forecasting future trends in technology advancements. His essay on neuroeconomics was featured alongside essays by Bill Gates and Joseph Stiglitz in the book Connecting Minds, Creating the Future. He is a transformative trends expert who knows what's next first. Please join me in welcoming Greg to the stage. Don't worry. Go on, off you go.
Well, that was quite the intro, so I've got quite a lot to live up to.
Yeah,
Thank you, Anne. Great to be here. Thank you so much for having me. I know you have kind of like domain experts coming to talk on various trends today. So what I'm going to hopefully try and give you today is a bit of an overview before the day really kind of gets into the sort of the weeds with some of the kind of emerging technologies that we're looking at. And as Anne says, I'm very fortunate. I get to spend my days sort of like talking with entrepreneurs, investors, technologists, designers, government agencies, people who are really thinking about how the world is changing and how we can shape it for the better. And I'm going to look at some of the trends that have transformed our businesses and organizations, consumer behavior and economies over the next few minutes. And I'll hopefully, give a kind of a balanced view of how, we can transform and harness the amazing upsides of these technologies, but also while also mitigating the risks of harms. So obviously the priorities of BSI are sustainability, digital trust, and the society's well-being. And I suggest that all of these things, so these kind of key cornerstones of the agenda, are inextricably linked in the coming years to how we deploy technology and how its opportunities are harnessed, while also how we address its potential dangers. So I think a great example was the UK Safety Summit that the Prime Minister hosted last week, with a laudable aim of ensuring that global standards are exercised and developed in the uses of artificial intelligence. But I think that we also have to, all of us, remain aware of the gap between rhetoric and action. So the UK really is yet to have any meaningful legislation passed on when it comes to AI, whereas we've seen legislation passed in the US, China, and the EU. So indeed, it's taken the best part of a decade to put any regulation on social media companies, which we've seen share disinformation, hate, content that's harmful to young people, because they've largely been allowed to set their own rules and standards. So I thought I'd start by offering some context and thinking about what we've been seeing over the past few years, because I think that really things have shifted just enormously in the last 3 years. Huge disruptions because of COVID, but also because of the uncertain geopolitical situation at the moment. And really, until the pandemic, the way that most organizations planned for the future was to really look at the world in a linear way. Progress could be planned and projected using the models of the past. Clearly now we're in a very different world. COVID's accelerated many of the trends that we were seeing, and geopolitical uncertainty is having an enormous impact on areas such as supply chains and disrupting access to components such as semiconductors, which now have become kind of something of a geopolitical tool to leverage influence. We're seeing the unraveling of many of the trends of the kind of globalization that has been really the bedrock of growth, economic growth over the past 30 years. So for many of us, the uncertainty, I think, of the past 2 or 3 years has upended many of the assumptions, many of the expectations that we had about the way that we manage and grow our businesses. So I think it's fair to say that there are some things that haven't changed, though. I think that one thing that we can definitely focus on, and I'm sure you're going to be focusing on today at the event, is the way that technology is converging. So none of the technologies on which the organizations and the businesses and the platforms and the opportunities of the future are going to be happening in a vacuum. These systems are highly interdependent, which we saw during COVID. And I think the one thing we do know is that we now live in this kind of highly interdisciplinary world in where machine learning, the blockchain, computational biology, robotics, additive manufacturing, clean energy transition, material science, and other technology transitions that are accelerating are all kind of coming together in consumer and industrial applications that are going to have real business impact and offer us to some of the greatest challenges, as Anne mentioned, that humankind faces, whether that's climate heating, global health, inequality. Another thing that hasn't changed is that how we fare in this kind of rapidly accelerating ecosystem isn't going to be determined by technology. It's actually going to be determined by human ingenuity, how we collaborate, how creative we are in challenging our assumptions about business as usual, how we drive innovation while also protecting our norms, our values, and ultimately how we embrace change. So I'd like to kick off by bringing this quote from the Danish Nobel laureate Niels Bohr, who got the prize because of his work on atomic theory. It's arguable that some of his early models were kind of the first to use quantum theory. Anyway, 100 years ago, he offered this quotation, which I feel is kind of hugely relevant today, because I think it illustrates that we now have to view change not as something that we think about on a daily, on an annual offsite, but something we think about in every aspect of our thinking, as it's a kind of permanent, ongoing state of affairs. And I think what's tough for all of us is that human beings aren't great at predicting the future, because we're kind of overly optimistic. We think that the things we'd like to happen will actually happen. And COVID was such a shock because we erroneously kind of based our predictions on past experiences. And it's really hard to adjust when we're seeing this kind of almost state of perma-crisis. There was a book that former Prime Minister Gordon Brown published, and they talked, and him and two very senior economists talked about this almost ongoing sense of kind of crisis that we have now. In addition, our brains are kind of wired to notice immediate things, but not when change happens gradually. So that's why climate is such a challenging phenomenon for human beings to address, because we believe that bad things could happen, but maybe not to us. So one thing I think that COVID taught us is that human beings are nothing if not adaptable and innovative. And obviously the pandemic was a period of innovation by necessity. And I think that probably most of us in this room, during that period, we thought very differently about our organizations, the way that we treated our customers, the way we treated our vendors, the way that we treated, in my case, our audience. And I think that there was a need to pivot process and operations. And we had kind of completely new data sets and completely new ways of thinking about the way that we were interacting with external collaborators. And most organizations then had the permission to try new things, right? Things they maybe wouldn't have tried before, which offered, big sort of strategic moves. And obviously, research shows that every organization that pursues these big strategic moves persistently through every stage of the economic cycle increases the odds of them outperforming their peers. So the shocks to our economy that we've seen over the past years has meant that really a lot of organizational inertia that really kind of stood in the way of making these big moves is now gone. So I thought this quote from, this is on an earnings call, I think in the spring of 2020, was really kind of pertinent. And he's I think, was CEO. He was really doing incredible things and really changing the culture at Microsoft. And I think, there's a lot of other big Silicon Valley figures that get a lot of press, but I think Satya is someone we should all pay a lot of attention to. This is also I had a call in the first couple of weeks, the CEO of a very large telco who was kind of like scrambling to ensure that they were able to provide broadband services to their customers. And I thought they really said something very interesting because they were really realigning their business at, literally over a weekend. They had to almost double their kind of like their ability to provide their service. So I think, in summary, the economic sort of shock set off by the pandemic has accelerated intensified trends that we were seeing. And that result is a dramatic widening between those at the top and those at the bottom of the power curve of economic profits, the winners and losers in the global the global corporate performance race. And so this chart just shows the market implied long-term profit for the largest companies globally. It shows patterns emerging among companies and industries, and it reveals the performance gap between the top performing companies and the bottom performing companies is actually widening. So what do we know for sure in terms of the way that tech will continue to accelerate and its adoption and reach? So we think about electricity and telephones. They took around 30 years to reach 3/4 of Americans. Smartphones took 8 years. So around 4 billion of us now carry these incredibly powerful supercomputers in our bags, in our pockets. TikTok launched in September 2016. All your children are on it. By the end of 2021, it had 3 billion users, which is just a phenomenal rate of growth. But we've already seen this kind of surpassed by the growth of ChatGPT, which managed to reach 100 million users in just 2 months after its launch in November the 30th last year. It took TikTok around 9 months after its global launch to reach 100 million, and it took Instagram more than 2 years. So technology, I guess, is enabled scaling in ways that we thought were previously impossible. We didn't just think it, we knew it. And so while that's apparent most in software companies, this also is happening in the material world and the biological world. So by October 2010, the cost of generating electricity from large-scale solar, power and wind dropped below the cheapest fossil fuels in the decade to 2019, and the price of electricity during that period declined by 89%. And we're seeing advances in areas such as synthetic biology, which can transform the manufacturing of physical products. We may be able to sequence and manipulate microorganisms, turn them into these kind of little factories almost that produce the chemicals and materials we need, not using petrochemicals. One piece of research, I think it was from McKinsey, suggested that around 60% of all physical inputs to manufacturing in the global economy could be produced biologically by 2040. And there's some really, really exciting companies coming through that hopefully will reduce our dependence on petrochemicals in order to manufacture the goods we need. Biochemical companies are and basically this is being also led by the way that FMCG companies such as Unilever, Diageo have committed to being carbon neutral by 2030, which is like an enormous task if you think about their enormous supply chains and the scale of their businesses. So we're seeing enormous shift in those kinds of areas. And this is a whole area where we're going to need to set new standards. We're going to have to establish, this largely on a global basis. Third point is that technology does create winner-takes-all markets. So if you look at the market share of a company like Google, it has around 80% of search in the US, more than that in the UK. It's got nearly 100% in Brazil. Smartphone market, Android, which is part of Google, it's installed in 4 out of phones globally. Apple owns everyone else pretty much. More than 85% of US teenagers now have an iPhone, which is extraordinary. So basically, if you want to reach American teenagers, you have to go through Apple. And if you have to go through Apple, you have to pay them 30%. So that is one heck of a business. We're also seeing the rise of superstar companies. So they rise above others. They're not held back by market forces in the same way. They dominate markets that already exist, and they also create markets that didn't exist before. And the rapidly declining cost of tech is obviously a factor to this, but there's also this incredibly powerful feedback loop that all software and technology companies have that turns them into market leaders, this kind of perpetual motion machine. So-called network effects, which I'm sure many of you are aware about, which basically means the larger number of users, the better the product becomes, the more users it gets. So its second place becomes a very, very long way behind because of these network effects. If you look at the gap between Google search and Bing, which is the second largest in the world, there is an enormous gap between those two numbers of users. So effectively, this kind of creates systems where we have to look at existing rules around monopoly, competition, power, taxation, those kinds of issues. I think being able to ensure that these large organizations play by established rules and ensuring that there is a level playing field is increasingly important in the era of AI, where we're seeing very dominant companies already being established, and there will be big winners in this area. Kai-Fu Lee, who is used to be head of research at Apple. He's now probably China's largest AI investor. He describes AI as a winner-take-all technology, and he has a saying that there's no, I think, silver medal for AI. Like, whoever wins this is, and he's talking geopolitically, is going to have a very dominant position. So technology also changes the way that we access commodities, the way we manufacture products, the way we generate energy. And we're seeing this movement away from as I said earlier, from this kind of globalization to almost kind of like a relocalization in some areas of our markets. So we're going to see this impact in multiple ways. Additive manufacturing is further going to increase the value of intellectual property, and a new trend of you ship the design, not the product. So we won't see the large-scale movement of goods in the way that we have done over the last 20 years. We'll increasingly see manufacturing done in local markets. This has obviously been heightened by the pandemic, and I think that it will increasingly be something that we see, and we will see kind of like these supply chains maybe begin to fragment a little bit. Obviously, we're seeing trends around hybrid working, which I think are beginning to sort of slightly reverse from the kind of like the pendulum shift where, everyone thought, well, work from home was going to be this trend that was here to stay. I think the pendulum is kind of going back a little bit towards people wanting to be together and wanting to collaborate. So how are you feeling about the world at the moment? A few months ago, this is obviously pre-Israel-Hamas war, I attended a meeting in Brussels of senior business leaders from across Europe, and it was frankly a little bit of a downer. They were talking about spiraling inflation, surging energy costs, Ukraine, supply chain bottlenecks, semiconductor shortages, Sino-US relations, sluggish growth, constrained labor supply, populist demography, the future of knowledge work, economic inequality, and obviously as a drumbeat behind everything, the urgency of the climate crisis. So, good times. And I realized that many of these topics are on your mind today, but I'm hoping maybe in the next few minutes to inject a little bit of a note of optimism by offering some kind of, sort of sense of some of the positive things that are happening, driven by tech. First of all, I'm going to show, if you've ever been to a technology presentation before, you will have seen this. This is rolled out at every technology. What it basically shows is it's called Moore's Law, and it has this sharp graph, like going from left to right, going upwards, and it basically shows the empirical regularity with which the number of circuits on an integrated, the number of chips on an integrated circuit, how it increases over time. And the idea was that the doubling of processing speed every 18 months impacts not just the capability of consumer and industrial products, but also their price. So machines are getting faster, and the price is declining rapidly. So there's a lot of talk about whether this still applies, because we're increasingly getting these incredibly kind of complex chips that only 4 companies in the world are actually able to produce. But I want to kind of show you something else called Wright's Law, which I think is increasingly important. So in 1936, Theodore Wright, who was an aerospace engineer, he said about trying to understand the effect of quantity production on cost. So he published a paper that was based on the aircraft industry, and he concluded that for every cumulative doubling of units produced, cost decreased by a constant average. So on a graph, you see this decline, right? So the more you do these things, the more. He described it as a learning rate. So basically, the more you do something, the more you learn to be better at it. And you understand how to make products and to engineer them better. So why is this important? Well, we're beginning to see it in all kinds of really super interesting areas. So solar costs. We need to scale sustainable technology. This is humankind's probably greatest challenge at the moment. And we're seeing this in the production of photovoltaic cells, which have dropped in cost by 99% in the last 4 decades, which is just extraordinary. Similarly, you can see this very similar pattern with lithium-ion batteries, which have plummeted 97% since they were first introduced in 1991. We've seen the cost of offshore energy accelerated downwards dramatically over the past 5 years. So future onshore and offshore wind costs are expected to decline between 37% and 49% by 2050. And I think you can say that these declines are attributed to learning curves. As we've made more of the outputs, we've learned how to make them better. And I think the other major area that's super exciting is we're seeing the decline in the cost of the human genome sequencing. So about a year ago, a company called Illumina, which controls around 80% of the DNA sequencing market, announced a machine which it claims it will bring down the cost of processing a human genome to about $200. So that is extraordinary. 13 years ago, the Human Genome Project took thousands and thousands of researchers and cost $2.7 billion for a single genome. Today, we're talking about being able to do it for hundreds of dollars. What does this mean? It means that it will give researchers insight into fundamental aspects of biology that could drive breakthroughs in healthcare, cancer, inherited diseases, combating pathogens. So we need to harness this kind of entrepreneurial spirit with the powerful levers that government can deploy. We can set rules on emissions, rules on material standards, regulate markets, price in the external impact of products that emit carbon. And we can also act to classify the risks of climate heating, leverage the vast power of procurers, and embrace the role as a government has of the largest investor still in scientific research. So here's the plan for I don't have a clock down here. I'm not quite sure how I'm doing on time. How are we doing? All right. 10 minutes. OK, I'll do my best. So this is the plan. I'll try and get through it. So, automation. Automation as part of operations, we've seen this enormous growth. This is a delivery bot from a company called Starship, founded by one of the founders of Skype. These are commonly, if anyone been to Milton Keynes recently, you will have seen these things rolling around Milton Keynes. They're commonly used in China. JD.com, which is the Chinese version of Amazon, is using them. There is a clear case for this in terms of a customer journey, right? If we want these bots to be useful, though, we have to make them being able to understand the world, and we also have to sort of set standards of what they can do, what they're able to do, what they shouldn't be able to do, how they behave on the streets. Human beings are hard to predict when we move on the street. We are only going to do this basically using machine learning through neural networks that convert very unstructured, low-level data into high-level information so that the machine can make the right decisions. But we're going to need to continually map our world and develop the technologies, largely imaging technologies, that are going to need very, very powerful computation that allow machines to understand the world around them and to anticipate what's happening. And obviously, to do that, we're going to need to set standards of how we feel that should proceed. This is a Walmart store a couple of years ago. So they introduced in 50 stores in the south of the country robots. They move around, they scan, they look at sort of shelves, make sure when products are kind of are getting restocked. And what was really interesting is that, like, when they were first introduced, people would take videos of them, put them on YouTube, they'd take selfies of them, put them on Instagram and Facebook. And researchers went back about sort of 18 months after the robots had been introduced, and they observed that the humans were no longer interested in the machines. They didn't even notice them. And I think this is where kind of technology gets interesting. It's like we forget it's even there. And when we talk about, the future of work, we talk about the concern of, automation on jobs, whether robots are coming after our jobs. I think that, automation has impacts that we can't necessarily foresee that are positive as well as negative. So thinking about standards, this is Elisha Otis back at the World's Fair in Crystal Palace in 1854. And he wanted to demonstrate that his new invention, which would basically involved a safety system on elevators, was safe. So he literally went around the world demonstrating. He cut this rope and he dropped, but it dropped just a very small distance because he would be locked in. And he felt he had to show people that these things were safe. And that's an amazing piece of technology at the time. But that piece of technology doesn't really exist in a vacuum. That piece of technology is largely responsible for the fact that we were able then to start building cities in the way that we built them, right? You cannot have a city like New York or Chicago or any of the cities that we see in China now without elevators. You have to have them. So I think it's a sort of like, it's a way of thinking about technology that kind of has these kind of outsized impacts on the world that are maybe beyond the scope of the people who were originally kind of bringing them to bear. This is about 100 years later. This is the unveiling of the world's first ATM. Happened in Enfield, just up the road in 1967. And scenes like this followed everywhere. People were kind of like really fascinated by these machines, and they showed up, they wanted to use them, they would run out of money. And I think there was a lot of concern at the time from bank tellers. They all said, well, our jobs are going to be threatened. We're not going to be able to sort of like hang on to our jobs. But in fact, 20 years later, there were more bank tellers, there were more people working in banks. They were just doing different things. So I think that, we now don't even think about these things almost as robots. I mean, I haven't used one for years, maybe because we're all using contactless now. But I think that it's a good illustration of the fact that we are moving into this kind of era of like an autonomy economy where machines will go about their task with minimal oversight by humans, but we need to bake those standards, those conventions, those rules in at the very outset if they're to function in the right way. So there's a lot of kind of scary kind of stats out there about, adoption and the future of work and technology and robotics and AI and how it's going to affect us. And there was a McKinsey report that estimated 375 million workers would need to switch occupational categories by 2030. Sort of like really scary paper by Carl Frey and Michael Osborne from Oxford estimated 47% of US employment would be at risk. Some really, really big sort of like numbers. But there's also a lot of other studies, such as this one, and one by the World Economic Forum that suggests that actually, while there will be large-scale displacement of jobs, automation will actually create many more. So the WEF survey said that 75 million jobs would be displaced annually, but 133 million new ones would be created. So corporate governance is going to be a crucial element of ensuring that such schemes, we are doing lifelong learning. We're focusing on individuals and upskilling workers in order to ensure that, if their roles are impacted by automation, that there are these new skills, these new ways that we can invest in. And this isn't just going to affect, people talk about retail, people talk about taxi drivers, but actually this is going to affect white-collar jobs as well. Goldman Sachs once had around 500 people on its equities trading desk. It now has 3, right? So there's a lot of, adaptability and flexibility in workplaces is going to be needed in the coming years. And historically, as our economies have become more automated and employment levels have tended to increase. So automation ends up creating whole new sectors of the economy. So the quantity of jobs is going to remain high, but I think the challenge is we have to think about what the quality of those jobs is going to be. We have to, ensure that we're building skills and that, ensure that there are, working conditions are, not set to decline. Another trend you'll see here is just the number of people that organizations employ. So GM at its peak, 900,000 people. Alphabet 2019, I think it's grown a little bit since then. They have had recent job cuts, but I think it is a little bit more. But 120,000 people in, one of the world's most valuable companies. Yet, the robo-apocalypse isn't happening. Why is that? Well, automation at an early stage is very, very hard. It's hard to automate a lot of jobs. And I think that it makes, a lot of sense to automate some jobs. So fund managers, for instance, are being replaced by automated systems. For the first time ever, there are more passive funds than actively managed ones. And actually, rather than causing mass unemployment, it seems that companies can actually use automation to become more competitive. And that's not at the cost of jobs, that's actually at the cost of less competent firms. So automation is usually bound up with an ambitious, well-run company. Ocado is a really, really good example of this. It white labels its supermarket warehousing technologies and logistical ability all over the world. They work with Kroger in the United States, and it grew its headcount really significantly, although it's deploying technology at scale, and really is, I think, very, very interesting use case of automation. So I think it's probably fair to say that, like, when people do lose their jobs, it's usually a kind of like a challenge around leadership. Automated companies tend to become more competitive. They tend to become more productive. And I think it is a bit of a kind of a folksy economic belief that there is only so much work to go around, right, that upsets the equilibrium. We heard this argument when women were joining the workforce. We hear it about immigration or all robots. It's the same argument that basically I think it is kind of like a form of zero-sum thinking. We have to think about these new jobs that will be created. And the new needs that will be created by it. So startups building self-driving trucks will create entirely new types of jobs, like people who manage fleets of vehicles or remote. We're seeing companies like VEY in Berlin that have these automated drivers who are operating these sort of like semi-autonomous vehicles. So I think we're kind of focused on the quantity of the work available when we should be thinking about the quality of the options available. All right, so talking about standards. So this is a really interesting, it doesn't look it, but it's actually a really interesting bit of tech. It's a sensor from an aircraft engine, and this is the first ever 3D printed aircraft part that was approved for use by the Federal Aviation Authority. And if you've been on a plane with a General Electric motor in the last sort of 4 or 5 years, on a Boeing 777, you've probably been on a plane where this has existed. So I think what it sort of demonstrates is that moving away from the era of 3D printing being about hobbyists, but it's actually now being deployed for the direct manufacture of specialist components. Industries like defense, we're seeing it being used a lot, automotive as well. GE just announced earlier this year that it's now able to 3D print wind turbines on site, which is going to be which means that we're going to be able to deploy this technology much more quickly. And it also offers us the ability to create all kinds of new products that we weren't able to consider before. So we can combine new materials at a nanoscale and printed electronics to exhibit features that are kind of very different from the ones that we're currently thinking about when we're manufacturing. So 3D printing can control material right down to the molecules, right down to the atoms. And we talk about supply chain problems, as I mentioned earlier, which is a really major challenge for a lot of organizations. But this kind of decentralized manufacturing model could be helpful, some of those challenges. I was going to show you a very quick video. This is a guy called Skylar Tibbetts who works at the MIT Media Lab in Boston. And he's working on this thing he's calling 4D printing. And the fourth dimension is time. So this is an emerging tech which will allow us to manufacture objects that then reshape themselves, or they self-assemble over time. So obviously this is a cube that's going to assemble itself, but think about it and deployed in the real world. We could maybe manufacture pipes that could expand and contract according to need. So he's basically making objects out of programmable material. And the big idea is that manufacturing isn't an end point, it's a waypoint. These things will change after they've been manufactured. I'm not even going to bother talking about the metaverse because I don't think it's a thing, and I'm running out of time. Sorry, metaverse people. I think it's worth thinking about new interfaces. AR and VR, I think, are technologies that we are going to see deployed very, very soon. There is still no real sort of consumer product that has broken through yet. I think Apple Glass will be an interesting product, but it's obviously very, very high end. It's only for people with a lot of money. I think that they are going to be new interfaces, and I think the way to maybe think about it is the way that when you first, in 2007, 2008, started interacting with touch screens, we are going to increasingly be using vision and voice in our lives, and obviously anyone who's got an Amazon Echo is doing that today, and there's real opportunities, I think, to think about different kinds of platforms. I don't know about you, but I have, my AirPods are like now a device that I really spend a lot of time using, listening to podcasts, on phone calls, and they become like another platform, and we're increasingly going to see the human body used as a platform through both our ears and our eyes as we deploy these kinds of technologies. I think this is a really old video, but I wanted to show you because I think this is the best use case I've seen. This is the HoloLens, the Microsoft product. I mean, augmented reality is not new. If your kids play Pokemon Go, they're using augmented technology. But I think this is a really interesting use case because it's basically showing how it can be deployed in the real world. Just layers of information in front of you. You can see the real world, layers of information, and you can see how this might be practical and how it might be used. Obviously, all big tech companies, Apple, Facebook, Snap, are all doubling down on AR. They're working on consumer products. And, in terms of standards, I think there was a really interesting kind of use case with the new Apple device where when you were looking out of the device, so you were looking at the real world and you were looking at other human beings, it has kind of like an eyeball appear on it, so you can tell you're being looked at, as opposed to when the device is closed and the data you're only seeing on screen. So we're going to see sort of like use cases around this. I don't know if any of you remember Google Glass a few years ago, but it was quite creepy encountering someone who was wearing them because it had a camera on it, and I think that most of us would not want to be filmed in that way without our kind of permission being granted. So I kind of feel like I'm probably running out of time, 5 minutes maybe, just to whip through a bit of AI because we can't not talk about AI. How is AI going to shape us? I think it's going to shape us creatively. I think that all kinds of jobs that were done by human beings are obviously going to be done now by machines. Really good examples like something like legal services. We're seeing a really interesting British startup called Raven that's working with the Serious Fraud Office on complex financial cases. And it's able to wade through thousands of documents a day with fewer mistakes than human lawyers. But that means that lawyers can spend more time working on the case and less time doing tedious things. I think it will allow us to see the world in new ways. So think about the way that drones and satellites are offering us, the ability to look at geospatial challenges, whether that's, agriculture or whether that's sort of like the ability to sort of see, crop yields that are happening, or it's being used a lot in sort of like maritime industry at the moment to see the global flow of commodities across the world. It will help us to make better decisions. Machine learning can obviously analyze data in ways that see behavioral indicators in a way that human beings simply can't. I was talking to someone who works in the insurance industry, and they're now able to offer loans to people in ways that they previously weren't because they're seeing much more data that goes beyond the kind of like the traditional data of bank accounts. They're able to look at people's the way they use their mobile phones. Great example, DeepMind, the amazing British AI research company partnering with Moorfields Hospital, Piers Keane, one of the ophthalmologists there, and he partnered with DeepMind in order to be able to look at scans of people's eyes and be able to sort of identify problems much more quickly and much more efficiently, and he's now able to spend more time with his patients because they're able to see these X-rays much more quickly. And we're going to develop human understanding. I'm not going to sort of like get too into sort of like ChatGPT other than to say that clearly this is now where we are going to see sort of like enormous growth in the coming years. There's a lot of concern about kind of like misinformation and hallucination around it, the way it will affect employment. But we're seeing, obviously very, very quick deployment of it in most organizations. I saw sort of some piece of research that suggests that around 40% of all senior managers now are thinking about how you can deploy it in organizations. But just a final, that was misinformation. A great example of things that you can see in the world. It could impact around 18%, but we're also seeing, because there was one, I think, Goldman Sachs survey that suggested it could increase global GDP by 4%. So just one final word. This is a guy called Massimo Banzi, who's one of the founders of a company called Arduino, which is an Italian company, a bit like Raspberry Pi. It's a very simple microcomputer. And you take those kind of creations and you can build something on top of it. And when they developed this, they could have hid the design files But they didn't. They put them online. They made them accessible to everyone. One of my favorites was, you know, you see these people all over the world doing really cool projects, and one person hooked up this Arduino and he programmed in it to drop the volume on his television when the closed captions revealed the word Kardashian. And I think that's the kind of innovation we can all get behind. And I love Massimo's quote, "You don't need anyone's permission to make something great," which I think is a nice way maybe to end this session. Thank you. Where are we going? We're going over here? Yeah. Where do you want? Shall I sit on the end?
You're right.
Sorry, I've walked off with the
I
clicker.
can't quite remember which chairs we're meant to be in. Which way did you want us? That's good.
Perfect.
Perfect. Well done.
Comfy.
Right answer. So thank you very much, Greg. Thank you so much for that.
That was a bit of a whistle stop,
I
sorry.
know, it was quite speedy. I feel exhausted. And I don't know how you feel. We've got a great opportunity. We've been allowed an extra 5 minutes.
Oh,
so we've got a great opportunity to take some questions from the room. And also we've got some on that we've received already in advance if we need them. But actually, as a first go, does anybody have any questions for Greg before I ask any? Put your hands up, quick. Right down in the front. Oh, okay, brilliant. Loads. Let's start here.
yeah.
If you could just introduce yourself so that we know who you are, that would be great.
Yeah, my name's Rahul. I'm a foundation doctor in Chelsea Westminster and also National Finance Director for MedTech Foundation. I wanted to pick your mind about AI and how that's going to shape healthcare.
Yeah.
Working now, nothing has actually come into practice yet, at least. I know you touched on it a bit, but I want to pick your mind on where you think it's going to go, what the biggest technology advancements are going to be, and how that changes how we work in a hospital.
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously, the key, if you work in the NHS, you have one of the biggest data sets in the world around healthcare. And actually, the UK is pretty great. Is it the UK Genomics Project? It's, I think, one of the biggest databases on genomics. I think, obviously, we are pretty much leading, I think, in this area. I think that, you look at some of the innovation that's going on within, obviously the NHS is an enormous organisation and there are all kinds of IT challenges around it because it's not kind of joined up. But if you look at the way that I think we can deploy AI in areas like, so drug discovery, I think, is a really, really good example of that. So there was very early on in the pandemic, was it Benevolent? Dame Joanna Shields' company, that company, they quickly ran, they have an enormous database of pretty much every drug in the world and its kind of components and how it's made. And they ran a very quick check, but they got the sequencing of COVID, they ran a check, and they were able then to come up with a compound that a drug that already existed that then could be deployed to sort of help slow the progress of the disease. It wasn't a cure in any way, but it was, I think they did it within 48 hours of having the breakdown of, the DNA sequencing of the COVID genome. So I think we're going to be able to see deployments like that. I think that as soon as we get, I know that there's kind of obviously a lot of, shall we say, there's a lot of challenges around sort of we'd like to think of the NHS as this kind of perfect organisation. I know you know it's not. Yes, you're shaking your head. But I think that we are actually going to have to sort of start working with a lot of private companies in order to sort of deploy AI at scale because they have the capability. So I know there's a lot of controversy around Peter Thiel's company, which I'm forgetting, being given. So Indra Joshi, who used to run AI for the NHS, has gone to work there, and there's a lot of concerns about giving access to NHS data sets. But as long as I think that that is regulated, and as long as we're able to sort of know exactly how the data is being used and there's consent informed, then I think that there are a lot of applications that could be very positive. So I think drug discovery, I think doing things at scale. There's the new what's the new scheme that's they want 5 million people to be part of this, right? Future Health. They've got 1 million people now. That's going to be an enormous data set. And I think that there is a lot of, although I think we tend to run down the UK when we sort of thinking about sort of some of these large scale projects, I do think that we do actually pretty great job, especially on the human genome project that we do.
I'm going to stop you there because that's a positive moment.
Okay.
The UK doing well, I think that's great. There were some questions over here.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks very much for a very, very optimistic and realistically optimistic presentation as well. Sorry.
I tried.
My question is, I had to write this down, and it's very mundane, but potentially quite important. Is there any research that you're aware of from industry globally on the appetite for AI regulation? That's a global...
From industry? Well,
yeah,
I mean...
Or just generally, is there any research on that at all? Just
yeah, I mean, I guess the answer would be, like, it depends who you ask. Like, I think that... so all the major technology companies are sort of doing a regulators, sort of like act, while they also beef up their teams in Brussels and DC, because they want it obviously regulated in the way that favours them. I mean, I think we're seeing, so I think the top 8 AI companies went to the White House recently, and President Biden signed the executive order relatively recently, in fact last week during the AI summit. I think that, like, obviously there are issues around competition, because this is, as you know, I said earlier on, the Kai-Fu Lee quote, it is kind of like a winner-takes-all sort of like situation. And there are some companies that are well ahead, so OpenAI is obviously well ahead of kind of Bard at this point. But, you know, there's some really amazing UK companies in this space as well, may I add, and obviously, you know, DeepMind is yet to sort of like reveal its hand in this, and I wouldn't be surprised if they come up with sort of like a pretty impressive product. But we're also seeing it, I mean, I've seen it recently, applications, really interesting applications in intelligence. So like real-time tracking of what's happening, for instance, on Telegram in Ukraine, like, you know, so that sort of like, you know, people within the MOD and, you know, intelligence services are able to sort of like check vast data sets in real time on, you know, so they can see what's happening on the ground. So I think we'll start seeing, there's also you were seeing it in areas like, I don't know, research papers. So like being able to sort of like look at, you know, research papers across, you know, vast amounts of kind of like research and actually kind of like hit the kind of like the key elements that you think might be interesting for the particular work you're doing. In terms of industry, to actually answer your question, yeah, I think it just depends who you're asking. But I think most large organizations see it as a positive, although I think there is a bit of panic in terms of, oh my gosh, we need to have this. And I think what will happen, and we'll see, sorry, just to finish off, is that most large organizations will employ like a head of AI. I don't know what the role will be or what the title will be, but like there'll be someone who's literally, that is their title.
Thank you. Thanks very much. We've got one here and then one in the front row as well. So it's probably on.
Hi. Ritwika from BSI. Really great to hear you talk. I was wondering about the black box nature of AI as an emerging technology. So, you know, sometimes we can train a neural network to do something and it does it sort of slightly differently, and it's not always clear why. How do you see us dealing with that uncertainty, and do you think standards have a role in that to help people deal with that risk?
Yeah, absolutely, standards have a role, and I think that we are going to need to. So if you look at the kind of the model of Web 2.0, where we let kind of social media get out of control and we reacted to it, rather than actually kind of like determining how it was deployed, I think that we learned our lessons there, and I don't think necessarily, and I know that there is, you know, conflicting research about sort of like things like, you know, teenage mental health, but, you know, as a parent of teenagers, I know that those networks are not necessarily sort of like positive for young people's mental health, and we have seen massive misinformation. We can see what's going on at the moment at Twitter. So I do think we need to get a hold of it. I do think we need those standards, we need that regulation. The black box nature is worrying. If you look at the announcement that Elon Musk made about Grok the other day, they're training it on Twitter data. Twitter data is full of hate speech. It's really, you know, become a very toxic place. If that's the data we're training our bots on, that's not the kind of bots that we want in our world. So I think we have to look at the kind of data we're using, because I think we're seeing inbuilt biases, you know, and you know, systemic kind of problems that are represented online that reflect what's happening in society. I'd also sort of like say that, you know, the black box nature of it is worrying, because there's a professor at NYU or Columbia, Gary Marcus, who's very much like, he's a professor of AI, but he's very much kind of like a naysayer. And he's kind of interesting. He's got an interesting blog if anyone's interested in checking it out. But he describes generative AI as effectively, he says, it's a bullshit machine. He says what it's trying to do is it's just trying to convince you that it's kind of has consciousness. But actually all it is doing is just trying to convince you. There's no actual, it has no relationship to the truth. Right? All it's trying to do is it's looking across vast data sets and it's predicting what word will come next in any given situation. So I think that we have to be very careful about how we, and I am a firm believer in, yes, innovation, of course, we don't want to, but I do think we need regulation and standards.
Thank you. Another question down here. This side of the room, you're very quiet. So there's a gentleman here. Oh, and there's one there. Okay, so we'll take this lady and then we'll go there, yeah.
Hiya.
Hi, I'm Victoria. Thank you so much for the presentation.
Very welcome.
My question is around the UK and UK businesses.
Yeah.
We've got phenomenal research and development. We discovered, many years ago, we discovered graphene as an example.
Yeah.
But when we look at how we are commercializing that innovation, that technology, what, in your view, should UK businesses be doing? And we're not talking about these high-flying startups that are dominating, but what can the majority of UK businesses do better? What does government need to do to support it? And what can we do as standards makers to help to support UK businesses to better commercialise all of this innovation from AI, blockchain, and all these wonderful things?
Oh my gosh, that's such a massive question.
That's a huge question. How would you like to break that one down?
Gosh, yeah. So how should you, I think that when it comes to technology, like UK business is pretty good at adapting, but it's not necessarily good at investing in the right places, because obviously, you want to make sure that you're deploying capital in the right places. So I think that the businesses that I've seen that are doing it well often set up units that are kind of almost like startups within an organization. And they allow them to make mistakes, and they allow them to kind of go off and, just try things. And I think that one of the things that you definitely see in Silicon Valley that maybe we're not so good at in Europe is that ability to fail and make mistakes. And I think that we have to sort of be a little bit more open to that, but within obviously some kind of sandbox environment, some kind of safe environment. In terms of government, I think that, having sort of broad-based standards and regulation is really, really powerful. And I do think that the initiative around the AI Safety Summit was really good, because I think that, that shows that the UK is trying to lead on those issues. And I think what's important is the follow-through on those issues. So it was really good to see that they haven't just announced that this was a one-off, that there would be a conference in South Korea, and then one in France, I think, in a year. I think it was South Korea in a year or 6 months, I can't remember. So I think that, we are seeing, we're seeing Matt Clifford working on, ARIA, which I think is a really important initiative, which is, the advanced research. I think the UK is leading on that. That needs to trickle down, obviously, into applications in the real world to support business. And we're seeing other kind of I do think that the artificial intelligence, the government initiative around ensuring that UK businesses are supported around that area, and the training and skills are developed, is really important. But also, I think that the thing that we shouldn't forget is universities in this country. We've got some of the best universities in the world. We really lead. If you go down, down the road to UCL, it's probably one of the best AI or machine learning sort of departments in the world. And, Demis Hassabis, did his PhD there, the founder of DeepMind. So I think we shouldn't I think making those bridges between industry and organizations and academia is really important. I think those two things have maybe been separate. And one thing I think that maybe we need to think about in terms of organizations is cross-functional and interdisciplinary collaboration, and so teams not operating in silos, but maybe, engineers, so I don't know, chemists sitting with physics, graduates sitting with engineers, sitting with computational, people with computer science degrees. And I think that that's, one way of maybe having that kind of cross-disciplinary innovation that is kind of, I think, the place where most interesting things are happening right now.
Thank you. Let's do the question in the middle there.
Hello, I'm Douglas Schwab. I'm an architect in private practice. It's clear from your presentation that technology is advancing at a huge rate. Well, my question really is, considering the court case of sub-postmasters, which is very worrying to me, how do management be responsible?
Responsible, yeah.
Within the technology realm, especially as technology is advancing so quickly.
Yeah.
We have to lay our trust somewhere. How do we effectively do that?
Yeah, I mean, I think trust is absolutely crucial, and I mean, that postmaster case was absolutely scandalous, but I think that was also a failing of the legal system as much as it was technology, to be fair. And Private Eye did amazing work on that and ensured that there was justice for those people. Look, I think fundamentally it's the same as kind of, you know, any technology that we've had. So like cars didn't used to have seatbelts, and we decided we had to regulate and have standards within cars and motor vehicles that had to be constructed in certain ways. They had to be, you know, we had to have sort of safety standards there. I think that we're going to have to think about technology in exactly the same, or software and hardware that we're producing in exactly the same way. Aerospace, you know, used to be incredibly dangerous. Then we sort of like put rules in place. It's now probably the safest way you can possibly travel. So I think it really is just about being thoughtful. I think of also putting sort of the onus on organisations through regulation that they have to kind of bake this stuff in. You know, that there have to be sort of standards, and there have to be kind of, you know, sort of senses in which they have a responsibility that isn't just, you know, fiscal to their shareholders. It is something that is actually have a broader societal responsibility. And I think that, you know, we are seeing some companies that are behaving in incredibly responsible ways and wanting to do the right thing, and then we're sort of like seeing others who, you know, that whole kind of, I do think there was a very, very dangerous, how to put it, like wave of innovation that was kind of led by that, you know, move fast and break things mantra. I think that you know, that's a, you know, Mark Zuckerberg kind of based the company on that mantra, and I think we are seeing a shift away from that to more kind of thoughtful deployment. And I think the way also is that we can see this being done in better ways is through investors asking better questions. You know, so if you look at sort of like a lot of venture capital companies are baking sort of like D&I into term sheets now. So Atomico, which is a huge venture capital company here in London, founded by Nicholas Enstrom, one of the founders of Skype, they have, you know, in their term sheets, they have certain standards, certain behaviours, certain benchmarks in terms of the makeup of boards, the ensuring that there's representation, you know, across the board. And I think that kind of way of ensuring that we deploy, you know, technology and you know, culture, I think is something that we are. I think we're actually getting towards it, and I think maybe Web 2.0 was a great learning moment where this thing just kind of got out of control. And still, well, 2 weeks ago, it's taken us best part of 15 years to regulate it in the UK. Through a lot of good work by, you know, many MPs, but it's taken a long, long time.
Thank you. I'm really sorry, we are a bit out of time. In order to make sure that the rest of the day doesn't run really late, we're going to close the questions there, so I apologise for that. Greg, thank you so much for being with us today and for taking those questions. You can stay there for a minute. Unless you've got to go.
Thank you.
Okay. So the next sessions on our programme are going to the workshops. On the back of your tickets, if you all look at the tickets, you'll see where the sessions are and the rooms they are. If you can't find them, find somebody who from BSI who will be able to point you in the right direction. The sessions will begin promptly at 11:10 apparently, so you need to get your skates on, and will be followed by lunch. And then after lunch, you will be able to join a different session. So again, the screen in here will have them up, but also you've got the information on the back of your card. Just a very quick note to mention that one of our sessions this afternoon is something called the BSI Serious Game Pilot. And this is a session to try out a new game that we're developing to try and raise awareness about standards with young people and young professionals. Spaces are limited, but if you're interested in joining that, please can you let the reception desk know, and they will try and make sure that we get you in there. Apart from that, we'll see you back in here at 2:55 to 3 for the second plenary session. So I hope you enjoy the workshops. Thank you.
Thank you.
You know, you were brilliant.